This is nonsensical. My head might still be spinning from all the revelations about the starship, but it's clear that Arcadian was the one who would make sense of it, so all that nonsense about him being unworthy must be nothing but a lie.
You look at this from personal perspective, Arius of House Erigen. Your friend was undeniably wisest one of your company, but that mechanical mindset was precisely what made him dangerous. He would become corrupted by Commonwealth technology, and he would thwart our attempts of leaving this place. It is regrettable that he had to go, for his expertise would no doubt be useful, but it is for the good of all people of this world, and that is all we'll say about it.
For now. But I will get my answers before this is over, mark my words, and I will find out what you're hiding from— Wait, Sergeant, what are you doing here? Sir, we have a situation. We've been attacked by several mercenary companies from Medzaka and Crimson Company. We managed to stop them from following you, but they simply switched targets and are attacking our airships now. Trying to cut off our escape route. Sergeant, we have to go there right now and help our crews. We'll be stranded here without these machines. I know, sir. But there's simply too many of them. They even brought a gyrocopter with them. We tried to break through to the airships, but we can't do it with this thing shooting at us from the sky. Damn it, and we'll have to take it down first. Mr. Storm, do you think you could try to hit it with one of your spells? I know it's a fast-moving flying target, but I don't think we have any other option. Bloody Gerstein, I hoped he wouldn't force us to fight our own men. But there's no— Wait, did you hear that? Was that an explosion? They must have blown up one of our airships. We have to do something. I don't think we can do anything, Sergeant. Look there. There are at least 2 companies marching towards us and— Ah, yes, I had a feeling we were being watched. So Gerstein sent even Tigrans to hunt us down. Look there. They had us surrounded for a while now. What? How? Where the hell did they all come from? What do we do, sir? We charge them. Sergeant, gather what men you still have and come with me. We'll buy Mr. Storm, Galadea and Zabulus time to sneak away and try to finish the mission. If they can find the starship, then they can use it to convince people of Medzaka that this endeavor was not just a wild, mindless chase. And I don't want to hear any word of protest from you two. These mercenaries are here for me, so I plan to give them what they want. Come on, soldiers, let's punch a hole through these blasted cats. That will not be necessary, old friend. We are not here to stop you, but to help. That voice. Commander Rajal, is that you? Please tell me you're not joking. He wasn't. Your council might have turned away from you, but Tehran people will not. Brothers and sisters, protect the fallen prince. Let us repay our debt to him and drive his pursuers into the snow and ice they crawled out of. Charge! Stars. Remind me to never get on your bad side, Commander Rajal. That was probably the most one-sided fight I've ever seen. Still, I'm in your debt. If not for your intervention, then we would have all ended up in chains. That was the intended plan of these mercenaries, Lord Arius. We have joined them as they left Medzaka, and we heard enough about their plans for you. Still, you should not be thanking me, for I am but a common soldier now. Instead, allow me to introduce Commander Tress Hackfringe, first of Tehran people to be officially admitted into Artificers Guild. She was the one who led us here on behalf of leaders of both Kuzane and Sidiu. I see. Then it is a pleasure to meet you, Commander Tress. Your intervention saved our mission. No thanks are necessary, Lord Arius. I have merely repaid a small part of the debt I owe to you. But I can see the confusion in your eyes, so allow me to explain. We have met before, though you probably do not remember, or maybe haven't even noticed me last time. Back when you fought the slavers near Dorsmere, you and your people freed a group of Teherans who were to be sent to this distant empire in the north. I was one of these prisoners. You have saved me, my family and my companions from life of slavery, or worse, and so I decided to follow in your footsteps. As soon as my wounds healed, I departed for Medzaka and started learning craft of the artificers, so I could understand technology that you used to help us before. And now, here I am, offering my services for saving my life. I'm not sure what to say other than thank you. You don't need to throw your new career away on my behalf, though. You should take your warriors and leave before you displease your leaders. Weren't you listening, Lord Arius? Elders of Sidiu and Kuzane are the reason why I'm here. They know what is coming, and decided that you are our best chance of survival. Not to mention that we are all in your debt. You were the only one who cared about our people. Your council wanted to ignore us, the company wanted to enslave us, but you opposed them both, and even helped bridge the divide between youngbloods from Sidiu and elders from Kuzane. Teheran people are forever in your debt, no matter how many enemies we'll have to make. Very well. I'm not going to lie, we could certainly use some help, especially now that both of our airships are gone. Indeed. I apologize, my men were not fast enough. No, it's not their fault. They were outnumbered and they still fought with more bravery than I have ever seen. But there is another thing we must discuss. I know you cannot have good memories when it comes to Crimson Company, and yet here you are, standing side by side with one of their officers who claims to be on our side. Will you be alright working with them? I will not. The dwarf and his gunners proved their worth in combat by striking down their fellow mercenaries, but their treachery and willingness to change sides so easily makes them unreliable. Sorry to break it to you, Catgirl, but we were planning to join Lord Arius right from the start. Just had to wait for a good moment. Remember, we were supposed to join the attack with you, but instead we circled around to strike other companies from behind. And, you know, we even blasted a gyrocopter out of the sky for you. Yes, and you also could have done so just to save your lives after you noticed the battle was lost. You say that you were planning to join us right from the start, but do you have any proof of your words? Sure do. Here, it's a letter from Executive Ranulph Caradus, written well over a month ago. He can't help you openly, cause that would mess with company reputation, so he decided to send some help off the books. Short story is that, while Ranulph appreciates Gerstein's idea, he also believes that we should try all options to save ourselves. So, while officially he'll be working with Mid-Second Council, unofficially you can count on his help as well. We're just a part of this help. I see. It makes sense and it fits Caradus perfectly, but I will not force my Teheran allies to work with you unless they want to. The decision is yours, Commander Tress. If the dwarf wishes to help you, then we will allow it, for this endeavor is greater than our grudges. But know that we will keep our eyes on you, Crimson Puppet. One wrong move and we shall tear you apart limb from limb. Splendid. Looking forward to it. But before you do that, how about yet another proof, eh? Lord Arius, you said you don't have means of transportation anymore now that your airships are gone. Sadly, we can't replace those, but we have some cargo ships in a hideout nearby. Hideout? You mean smugglers, then? On point, sir. Mr. Caradus said you were smart. Yes, those are ships we used to do some less than official trade, but at this point the entire world is freezing, so no one cares about embargoing some of the more exotic trade goods. So, we can use those ships as we want, and if I'm thinking correctly, then we should have plenty of special staff on board to turn the rest of this journey into a pleasure cruise. Although, now that I mentioned it, where exactly should we be going? Ah yes, that. Well, I'm going to be honest with all of you. This trip is not going to be either pleasant nor short. When Arius Erigen and his entourage left Medzaka for the last time, they knew that journey that awaited them was not going to be an easy one. They all accepted it, and yet, despite being prepared for the worst, what happened to Arcadian the Indomitable, paired with knowledge revealed by Zabulus mere moments after his death, took everyone by surprise and completely shook the morale of Prince's team. Furious as he might have been, though, there was nothing to be done. All Arius could do now was to move on, though as they left the bizarre blackstone pillar, his gaze was firmly focused on what, until recently, called itself Zabulus Lamar. The Fey Woman was no longer there, replaced by a murmuring chorus of the Shroud, and though everyone would love to punish it for killing Arcadian under some nonsensical pretenses of him being unworthy, they also understood that it was probably the only being capable of guiding them to their destination. Said destination, however, had to wait, for mere moments after they emerged from the fog, Arius' team was welcomed by sounds of battle. As expected, the pursuit from home finally caught up, and a group of mercenaries was already attacking Lord Erigen's retainers. What's more, the mercs clearly came prepared. With advanced equipment and superior numbers, they outnumbered Arius' force 6-1. Still shaken by Arcadian's death and unable to make a decision, it seemed as if the prince would be caught, but in that moment something changed. A group of Tigran and Dwarven mercenaries suddenly turned against their comrades and wiped them out to the last man, and then approached confused Arius and his company and pledged their support. As it turned out, last child of Erigen bloodline still had some friends and allies in the world, even though, as he quickly learned, he could not count on any official support. Still, the board of Crimson Company was more than willing to send a group of sharpshooters to help in Prince's journey, stating that, in such a critical situation, they were willing to explore all options of saving themselves. The Tigrans, however, were a bit less pragmatic, for in their case, their willingness to help was a lot more personal. The warriors from Sidiu and Kuzane were led by Commander Ajal, first Tigran people of Menzaka ever met, and a young, energetic, newly minted artificer going by the name of Tress. As she explained to Arius, she was part of the group that he saved from Crimson Company's slavers near Dorsmere several years ago, and now she and her people came along to repay their debt and help Prince however they could. Of course, just like the company, they could not do so officially, not without risking angering new Governor Gerstein, but at least they could bring some reinforcements and supplies, and both these things were desperately needed now. For, as Shroud said through Zabulus, the journey that this group of outcasts and fugitives would have to undertake was not going to be a short or easy one. Arius and his men would have to travel almost to the opposite end of the archipelago and there look for another sunken city where apparently Commonwealth stored a machine that could fly into the stars and save people of Menzaka, or at least some of them. With expedition airships destroyed though, said journey would take a long time, but fortunately, Dwarves of Crimson Company offered help in form of several unregistered cargo ships that were stationed on the other side of the island. It wasn't the most efficient solution, as it would mean that Prince's company would have to sneak across government-controlled territory, but at this point it was the only option, and so the group soon disappeared into freezing woods, with Tigrans and dwarves eyeing each other with distrust on account of their unpleasant history. But that grudge, grievous as it was not enough to cloud their judgment. They would have to work together if they were to stand any chance of reaching their destination and recovering the starship, and so the hatchet was buried, for now. As Prince's group marched across freezing lands around elven cities, their countrymen in the rest of Menzaka prepared to save themselves in another way. All across the colony, supplies were sent in bulk to Kairdon to help prepare the underground network of caves there to house as many people as possible. Scholars offered their wisdom, farmers sent their crops, and factories produced all manner of goods needed for an entire society of refugees. And though at first most people cared little about this sudden darkness, the longer it lasted, the more these unconvinced ones were willing to admit that something really was wrong. And once they did so, it didn't take them long to realize that Kairdon plan was the only one with any chances of success, and so, slowly but surely, more and more people both contributed to it and started to move to that city as well, hoping to secure a spot for themselves before the caves became overcrowded. Though, with their immense, still unconfirmed size, that seemed like a very non-critical issue for now. As for Menzakan army though, with the war against Emerald colonies over and done with, one could think that they would be free to return to their homes. This, however, could not be further from truth. After being convinced by General Vestrand, who led the army, the council decided to use it to spread their influence even further into lands formerly controlled by Lady Servenheart, that now splintered and fragmented into small, independent city-states. It seemed like an odd move at first. After all, the world was about to be covered in ice anyway, so building an empire at this point was nothing but a waste of time. And it was. But the plan wasn't to gain more territory, but to gather more supplies. Few months after Kairdon plan was approved, everyone realized that in order to prepare these caves for as many refugees as possible, Medzaka would need more material than ever before was used on any other project. As such, General Vestrand departed to the west once again in order to bring former Emerald colonies into Medzakan Fold, if only for a while, so that their resources could be siphoned to Kairdon. But while this was official statement, the council had two other reasons for approving this offensive. First was curiosity mixed with pragmatic thinking. After hearing rumors about the lizard people and witnessing them in combat, leaders of Medzaka began to think that these mysterious people could be immensely helpful to their efforts, as they were often described as masters of fire magic. And while in more civilized times fire magic was mostly considered as nothing but destructive, barbaric tool of war, with the world slowly becoming colder and colder with every month, these magical flames could no doubt be put to more pragmatic use, from warming houses to powering mining facilities and foundries in Kairdon. Additionally, the area inhabited by these dragon-like people was often described as the warmest place on the archipelago, covered in volcanoes, lava flows and ash plains as far as I could see. Normally, such places would be considered uninhabitable, but in current situation the government of Medzaka decided that it may be possible to move the population there if situation in the north of the archipelago became too unstable. The second issue, however, arose from pessimism, pragmatism, and understanding of nature of people of this world. Day by day, news about more and more chaos arrived from other continents, and it no doubt was only a matter of time before other nations realized that Medzaka had a place where people could hide and potentially survive the coming cold. And so, as Vestrand was sent further west, his orders were not to just bring former Emerald lands into the fold, but to push any potential front line as far away from Kairdon as possible. For as Colonial Council silently agreed, it was probably only a matter of time before other nations would try to come and take this last hope away from them by force. But while majority of Medzaka walked towards preparing Kairdon underground, some looked for alternative solutions, especially dwarves of Emendal, who were already suffering from the cold that made northern parts of their island almost completely uninhabitable, and turned the city itself into a small bastion of heat and light amidst the ocean of ice and snow. The port froze almost completely, and it took tremendous effort to keep it open, with massive foundries in the city repurposed into heat-generating furnaces. It meant that City of Emendal stopped producing pretty much anything, but at this point it was only a matter of time before it would end up completely swallowed by the snow, and so the port was filled with refugees looking for a passage to the south, either to Kairdon itself or to one of newly conquered territories. What was weird, though, was that a number of ships apparently made its way north, and said ships carried several dozen mercenaries and a ton of military and food supplies. What's more, in that very time the garrison of Kairdon was sent away from the city to help with evacuation of one of the more distant outposts deeper inland, but as they arrived to said outpost, they learned that it was already empty. Confused, they turned back and, after long weeks of marching through the snow, they came back to the city only to learn that a large number of people, including some of the high-ranking members of Crimson Company and City Council itself, fled it and joined up with a group of passing ships that moved as far away from the city as possible while speeding down south. A few drones were sent to try and figure out what these ships were, and to surprise of almost everyone in the garrison, they learned that they sailed not under the flag of Medzaka, but under banners of House Erigen. However, no pursuit could be organized, for all the faster ships were commandeered while the garrison was away, and so the only thing confused people of Ermendal could do was to send a message back to the capital in which they informed the council about Arius's last known position, an information that the government would do nothing about, as all their forces were tied down in the south. As for the people of Ermendal themselves, betrayed by their leaders and left to their own devices, they quickly forgot about the whole affair, as matters of their own survival were far more important. Rumors reached Medzaka that the mayor was shot while trying to calm the population, and day by day more and more people left northern reaches of the archipelago and moved south, while those who stayed behind desperately grasped at any hope of survival or evacuation. Makeshift ships were built to transport people south, some groups turned to piracy and tried to steal passing merchant ships just to load them up with as many of their friends and loved ones as possible and ferry them to safety. But to many, this collapse of Ermendal's government was a death sentence, as their city grew more and more isolated from the rest of Medzaka with every passing week. And even those who managed to flee were not out of the woods yet, and not just because Kairdon Caves were still not fully prepared. For in the coming months, refugees from all across the area would find their journey south to be a lot more problematic than they feared. I can't believe you've done this. The end of the world is coming and you are gambling all your life savings on stock market?
Because that's the best option right now. Have you seen the stock market recently? Everything is dropping like a rock, but all businesses related to the coming cold are skyrocketing faster than anything in the world. So, if that entire Ice Age business actually comes to pass, I'll have plenty of money to buy my way out of it. And if it all just turns out to be a scam, then at least I'll end up with bags of gold in the bank. And let me tell you, it certainly does sound better than your alternative of giving everything to those Azure Heart freaks.
These heretics can offer you no repentance, fools. This darkness is punishment from the stars themselves, and unless we correct our wicked ways, we shall never bask in warm light again.
And what about the prince? They just say all the time that it's all his fault. Personally, I think it's some weird political game between Gerstein and Erigen, and we're all just pawns here.
It's all a government hoax, I tell you. They probably used one of them airships to spray something in the air just to start this panic. Mark me words, before this is over we'll learn that there's some factory of winter coats related to Gerstein. He'll be laughing at all of you from atop the mountain of money he'll earn from your stupidity.
Not sure if it's stupid to buy a coat when it gets colder, but whatever. Now shut up, all of you. The news is starting.
Good evening, Medzaka, and welcome to third edition of today's news. This last week, ever since Governor Gerstein officially proclaimed our current situation, has been quite turbulent for us all, so I hope you are all sitting comfortably in a warm place so we can enjoy messages we're about to deliver. First and foremost, news that everyone waits for, weather reports. As you all know, last winter turned out to be one of the worst in history, rivaling even the one brought by the Archmage during his rebellion. Unfortunately for us all though, our winter looks like it's about to stay. According to official reports of Colonial Meteorological Agency, frostlands have expanded by about 11% this year, forcing at least 15,000 people in our nation alone to relocate in search of habitable lands. Additionally, certain areas of the Frostlands became completely uninhabitable, with reports from Bernoth, Ermendal, Surcaris and Rithiles stating that temperature have never gone above -10 degrees during this last year. And that is all here, in one of the warmest places in the world. According to reports from other nations, the situation is getting worse by the day, with snow barely disappearing 2 months later than usual in our former homeland of Southern. As expected though, the nation that is most affected is the Northern Empire. As usual, we have little information from inside this isolationist nation, but we know that Imperial Regency Assembly prepared an official statement.
Always weirded me out, that bit. They call themselves Empire, but they don't even have an emperor.
Yeah, and they clearly didn't need one, since Regency Assembly was in charge for what, last 700 years? And they're doing pretty fine, so clearly their one and only emperor knew what he was doing when he organized his regents. and stated that, quote, "Imperial government will ensure safety of its citizens no matter the cost, and all other nations should open their ports and cities for arrival of Imperial population that will be evacuated south in the coming months. To ensure cooperation, Imperial fleets and armies will be sent ahead to ensure every nation's full commitment to the cause." Obviously, all other nations around the world understand that this is essentially a declaration of war, but at the same time everyone doubts that Imperial military will be able to muster sufficient numbers and transport them south before the seas between them and the rest of the world freeze. Speaking of war and the coming cold, we also learned about new development from the Old Continent, where war between Emerald Council and Goblin Republic still rages on. During this last week, however, things have swinged drastically in Republic's favor due to their newest legislation. The new Prime Minister decided that, in order to ensure swift victory and safeguard themselves from approaching winter, population of the republics will be turned into undead ghouls. As is well known, the undead care not for the weather, and so they do stand a chance of surviving, although in such temperatures that are about to arrive, they may have issues with simply moving around, as their bodies will become stiff like a rock without blood circulation warming them from inside. Aside from that, several groups voiced their protests, some based on logistical reasons like the fact that undead will still need a supply of meat anyway, and some about the more moralistic issues, claiming that turning entire nation into ghouls will just be prolonging their suffering, for undead cannot reproduce. Regardless though, the vast majority of Republican military is currently undergoing the process of ghoulification, and we already received reports of ghoul stormtroopers launching successful strikes against heavily defended elven fortifications. We will keep you informed about the war as it unfolds. And now... Hold on, what is this? Are you sure? Give it here, let me read it. Ladies and gentlemen of Medzaka, my apologies, but it seems that we have some more emergency news to share with you. This message just came in from Council Halls. Apparently, in response to Governor Gerstein's proclamation last week, our former countrymen from Southern decided to declare war on us, claiming that we are all responsible for the coming troubles. What's more, they demand us to hand over the city of Kairdon, which, as you well know, may very well be our only chance of survival, as our administration is already preparing the caves there to house refugees deep underground, where the cold won't be so severe. It seems that Chancellor Ishizawa decided that, by right, these caves belong to Republic of Southern, and will use force to acquire them should we not hand them over right away. The message was signed by Governor General Kaval Hegran, who calls for our surrender. What is it now? You have to be kidding me, give it here! Ladies and gentlemen, it seems that Goblin Republics have the same idea. Their ambassador has just delivered a declaration of war to our council. It states that this is both a punitive conflict for causing this crisis and to secure place for Republican citizens in Kairdon Caves. The Council of Medzaka and Governor Gerstein have issued no comments so far, but we hope that we'll be able to learn something before morning. It seems that Crimson Company is the only nation in the world that is not openly trying to attack us, though. Apologies for that, that was unprofessional. This has been the voice of Medzaka, and we'll all hear each other in the morning. Have a safe night. When news about 2 declarations of war reached Medzaka, they caused less chaos than one might think. Few years or even months ago, such sudden collapse of international relations would no doubt be the first thing on the news, but with the world growing colder with every passing day, such revelations were to be expected. Governor Gerstein's administration tried to talk their way out of it, though, by sending official declarations that they're willing to share Kairdon Underground with everyone, but these statements were left without a response. Gerstein might have wanted to share, but it was clear that other nations were not, and were willing to do anything to take this city from Medzakans, who, in response to that, only increased their efforts to turn it into the most defensible fortress in the entire archipelago, for it was one thing to prepare the caves themselves, but another to keep others from simply charging into them and forcibly evicting refugees. Overall, the mood in Medzaka could be summarized as, "Come at us if you dare." Recent victories gave people of the colony a sense of pride, and trust in the army was at an all-time high, and even now, in these dark days, some people flocked to recruitment offices to protect their friends and families and ensure that they would have a future. Still, with Southern and Republican colonies now working against Medzaka, the Council knew that holding on across the entire front line would not be an easy task, especially now, as more and more men and resources were directed underground. What's more, while Goblin Declaration was received without much surprise, the fact that even Governor General Hegren of Southern Colonies, a man renowned for his ability to resolve conflicts peacefully, would go to war caught some people off guard. So far, after the Civil War broke Southern apart, people of this country never actually had to fight each other. This time, however, things were about to change, and people who, not that long ago, were friends and neighbors would now meet each other on the battlefield. Fortunately though, these declarations, while arrived at the same day, were not a sign of an alliance against Medzaka. If anything, they only proved that global diplomatic scene has completely fallen apart, for at this point it was pretty much every nation for itself strategy. The goblins were raiding southern settlements and Crimson Company outposts. General Hegren responded by launching his own counterattacks, while dwarves of Crid used it to push their own forces into his lands. Overall, the archipelago turned into an all-out war, and only Medzaka and Crimson Company were not actively fighting each other, though at the same time their cooperation from previous years was gone as well. It was a complete chaos in a time where unity was needed most, and, as some of the more realistic-minded people across the world suspected, it was probably only a matter of time before this every nation for itself mindset would turn into every man for himself. And once that happened, any attempt at coordinating any survival efforts would be pretty much impossible. Fortunately, these days were still some time away. Settlements located in the Frostlands, like Amandol, were affected the most so far, but other than that, the rest of Archipelago remained relatively warm and fertile. The snow covered more of it after last winter, and said winter lasted longer than usual, but most islands were still capable of sustaining their population. What they were not prepared for, though, was a wave of refugees that was bound to arrive from other lands sooner or later, and so all across the islands, towns and cities prepared themselves to repel not only potential invaders from other nations, but starved refugees chased away from their homes, people who had nothing left to lose. The future certainly looked bleak, and as bad news arrived with every passing day, more and more people started to turn to alternative sources for salvation. Religious cults, charlatans offering magical, frost-resisting potions, all of it and more started to spread all across the archipelago, forcing governments to redirect their troops to keep the peace instead of using them for other, more pressing matters. Even well-meaning Governor Gerstein, an elf who wished to save everyone, started to realize that, and soon first execution took place across Medzaka as groups of cultists were thrown down the cliff for spreading lies about the coming cold and Kairdon underground being some kind of gateway into hell itself. Such talking only undermined efforts to save as many people as possible, and in current circumstances, it was the worst crime imaginable, one that could only be punished by death. And that was just the start. The coming months would only see the situation deteriorate, and turn much, much more bloody. But one thing that was expected to end in bloodshed, however, turned out to be one of the most peaceful operations in Medzakan history, namely annexation of former Emerald colonies. After they fell apart after Lady Servanheart's death, knowing full well that High King was unable to respond due to war on the continent, the area fractured into several city-states, once mostly led by goblins. And while, for a moment, these independent states were able to keep a hold on their people, increasing cold and reduced fertility quickly proved to be deadly for them, especially in the more swampy, goblin-controlled areas that never provided much food to begin with. So when forces of General Vestrand reached their settlements, there usually was no need for them to fight. All they had to do was to promise starving, independent rulers and their people some food, and it usually was enough to completely dismantle any opposition, and convince former Emerald vassals to join Medzaka. After all, independence and ability to dictate your own fate were all fine and well, but when compared to not starving to death, they became much less pressing issues. And so, General Brimir's army made its way southwest, until finally it reached the main destination of their journey, a volcanic, ash-covered island inhabited not only by goblins, but by the secretive lizard people, whose settlements were located on the southern shore. The goblins joined Medzaka with no issues whatsoever, for, by now, they were no longer able to feed their own population. But as colonial force approached the first city of the Lizardmen, they realized that things might not be as simple there. First and foremost, it was clear that elves were no longer there, or, to be more precise, there were no living ones around, for the city was surrounded by a ring of stakes, each with an elven corpse impaled upon it. Seeing such a gruesome display, Medzakans prepared for battle, and indeed they had to kill a few crazed warriors that charged at them mindlessly from the ash, but as they reached the city itself, they found that it was a scene from a nightmare. Even from a distance, one could see that it was partially ruined, as it had no doubt suffered heavy damage while Servinhard forces conquered it in previous years. Unlike surrounding hills and plains, it was also not covered in ash but in snow blowing in from the ocean, carried here from stars only know where. The gates were broken apart, and so General Vestrand took a group of his best soldiers and rode on ahead, and what he saw inside was a picture of chaos. There was no organization or administration of any kind, as the city was inhabited by people who, until recently, were very clearly enslaved by their elven masters. Every lizard person inside bore marks of physical abuse, and their horns and claws were filed down into painful, bloody stumps. When Lady Raylis fell, a group of elven soldiers left the city to try to avenge her, and when that happened, the slaves rose up and slaughtered the remaining garrison, regaining their independence. But right there and then, they encountered a problem, one caused by the way their society was organized. As Brimir and his men asked around, they learned that these dragon people were organized into a very strict caste system, with everyone's role appointed at birth, and with almost no interactions between people of different social status. The leaders barely acknowledged existence of the workers, and rarely even conversed with their own warriors. At a glance, it seemed that such a system was bound to fall apart, and yet, as it turned out, it managed to survive for millennia. These dragon-like people were clearly organized and obedient, but while this must have been one of their main strengths, it also proved to be their major weakness. For when Lady Raylis arrived with her force, all she had to do was kill the leaders for the entire society to fall apart, and she did that under pretenses of friendship, by sending ambassadors and envoys who were, under their diplomatic disguise, nothing more but paid assassins. With their leaders dead and without their direction, the warriors offered fierce but uncoordinated resistance and were almost completely wiped out in about a year, with few remnants fleeing into the mountains. After that, only working caste was left alive, and they were quickly rounded up and forced to work for their new Emerald Overlords. It took them years to finally try and fight back, and this rebellion was the first time they rose up in significant numbers. But while it was victorious, these now free slaves found themselves facing another issue: what to do now. Much of their knowledge was lost with their leaders, and so, while they had means to start rebuilding their cities, they had no idea how to restore their society. Some groups tried to become leaders themselves, but fell to infighting, and within weeks of their liberation, the city of lizard people collapsed into complete chaotic mess. But Brimir's arrival offered a chance to save them. While he initially wanted to just conquer these lizards as well, seeing their city made the dwarf realize that it would also force him to do exactly the same thing Lady Servinhard did. If he wished to utilize these people, he would have to enslave them, and while it certainly wasn't something he was opposed to, the general simply didn't have enough men to pacify an entire city, so instead, he offered an alternative. Medzaka would offer these dragon-like resources, food, something they desperately needed, but more than that, it would also provide guidance and advice on how to restore their society. What's more, the colony would also offer these people refuge in Kairdon, as they were clearly unaccustomed to cold weather that assaulted them from the sea. In return, people of this city would allow settlers from Medzaka to move into this area, for it turned out to be a lot more fertile than it initially seemed. The response, however, was a bit different than anticipated, for instead of just accepting the deal, liberated slaves immediately appointed General Vestrand as their new leader, and within just few days became completely dependent on his directions, clearly eager to have someone to tell them what to do. At first, the dwarf was a bit confused by this sudden exaltation, but with Governor Gerstein and other Medzakan politicians providing advice from afar, he soon managed to get the dragon people organized, and their city, while still suffering from occasional blizzard, slowly pulled itself back from complete chaos. But not all of the lizardmen were willing to accept outside leadership so easily. Further to the west, there was another city of these people, and it was that location where their remaining warriors gathered after elven colonies collapsed. Like their enslaved brethren, they also slaughtered every elf they could find, and also just like their brothers and sisters in the east, doing so pushed their beheaded society into complete anarchy. But with a number of warriors on their side, that anarchy was a lot more dangerous, and soon inhabitants of this town started raiding all settlements around them to provide for their people. And, as their bad luck would have it, they launched one of these raids on a small hamlet exactly in the same moment when a patrol from Brimir's army was moving through it. The patrol managed to flee, at least parts of it, and reported this raid to their commander, who responded with glee, for now he could finally see how these dragon-like warriors fought with his own eyes. Leaving a handful of his men behind to keep his new city in line, he gathered all troops he could and began marching west, and after crossing a dangerous mountain valley filled with rivers of molten rock, his forces surrounded the city of warriors and demanded their surrender. The response, however, was an unexpected one. Few bolts of magical fire and javelins thrown from the walls at their emissary. With their backs against the wall, and with their freedom taken away from them once already, Lizardmen warriors decided to make a stand no matter what, even though they were desperately outnumbered and outgunned. What followed afterwards was one of the most one-sided siege assaults in Brimir's war-torn history. Cannons blasted the walls apart, and anyone else who stood on them. Airships, with companies of gunners on board, floated above the city, bombarding defenders with musket fire and precision ballista bolts. The warriors fought on bravely though, and their mastery of fire magic proved to be quite deadly for some Mexican companies, but the end result was obvious from the start. The assault on the walls started in the morning, and by dusk all defenders were either dead or captured, and the walking caste in the city surrendered themselves to Brimir with no hesitation. The few remaining warriors who saw that their heroic last stand meant nothing to the walkers broke free of their shackles and rushed at their own people, howling with fury, but a few well-placed shots put them down before they caused too much damage. The walkers, on the other hand, cared little for it. They were just happy to have direction in their lives, and when food was brought from Medzakan's supply train, all apprehensiveness and doubts they might have had disappeared right away. The lizards, whatever they were before, were now firmly standing on Medzakan's side, and while their society and culture was pretty much gone, at the very least its people survived. For now. For as the feast on the streets of the city was coming to an end, a few snowflakes drifted slowly from the dark sky, reminding everyone that all of their victories and triumphs would soon be buried under the ice anyway. Once again, on behalf of entire Medzaka, I am grateful for your recent efforts on the southern front, General Vestrand. The situation is deteriorating by the day, so having someone as reliable as you to provide us with constant good news is always welcome. We'll be sending you more supplies and men as soon as we are able. Thanks, but all this praise is not really deserved right now. Truth is that while these dragon people certainly look imposing, they're not really any military threat to us. Or, to be more precise, they're not a threat anymore. From what we've been able to learn from them, they were a lot more powerful just a few years back, but war against Emerald colonies completely broken their spirit. I see. The more I hear about this conflict between them, the more I see why Lady Sevenheart's forces were so limited when fighting us. She must have spent massive amounts of men and resources to conquer these lizardmen, but in that case, why declare war on us at all? Something doesn't add up here, and I feel like her father's constant complaints must have had something to do with this, but she's dead now, so we won't learn anything from her. Best thing we can do now is to move on with our plans, and speaking of that, what's your opinion on usefulness of these lizards? Right now, limited. As I said, it's clear that they were quite a proud nation once, but Emerald forces were thorough in their conquest. They wiped out pretty much every important Draconian, warlords, chieftains, shamans, people like that. Some were left alive, but only after they pledged unquestionable loyalty to Raylis herself, and she used them to organize their population. Long story short, it seems that they've been organized in even more rigid social structure than Old Elven Empire. From what we can tell, they're basically a caste society, and now that their leaders are gone, the grunts have no idea what to do with themselves because they always have been told what to do. There are some exceptions, like the ones we fought just now, but they still operate mostly without any plan. They're just trying to go out on their own terms, free of influence of other nations. Makes them quite ferocious in combat, sure, but they still go into said combat without any hope of coming back. If not for our current situation, I'd say it would be best to just leave them alone. That is concerning. According to our scholars, it seems that these... what did you call them before? Draconians? Yeah, the soldiers decided to give them a nickname. Said something that calling them just lizards is derogatory and some other nonsense. Still, it kinda stuck. It's simple. I like it. Anyway, these Draconians seem to have affinity for fire magic, which could be useful against the coming cold. Then again, if their shamans were wiped out, I doubt that the general population can be of much help. Some of them can. They're really rather good at creating flames out of nothing. But that's also a problem. They live in the southernmost part of the archipelago and are surrounded by all these volcanoes and lava flows, which at one hand makes this place a very good area to flee from winter. But at the same time it means they're absolutely awful when it comes to dealing with even mild cold. Remember the previous city that accepted our administration without fighting? They got hit by a few snowstorms that came from the ocean, which dropped temperature there close to zero for a few days. That was enough for well over 1,000 of them to get sick and die. Stars. So in case of actual winter they will just die out in a matter of weeks. That's not good. It means that we can't really move them anywhere without investing in some insulated ships, and because it's colder in the skies, moving them with airships is out of the question either. Do you have any suggestion how we could use them then? Bring them into Kairdon Caves anyway, at least those with proper magical abilities and enough of them to form at least a small, functional community. Some of them will probably die on the way, but in our current circumstances we can't afford to be lenient. I can put my army to work and ensure they will obey your orders. Aside from that, we could probably start moving some of our own people to these islands. As you notice, they are the warmest area of the archipelago, and despite all the ash and volcanoes, it is quite fertile. We could use this place to gather as much supplies as we can before retreating underground. Very well, we'll do just that. I'll talk to commanders of our navies and send some of them to organize the resettlement of Draconian people. Don't expect much in terms of escort forces though. We need all the forces to keep an eye on sea lanes to prevent goblins and our former countrymen from launching an invasion into our heartlands. And that's where I come in. If you can provide me with supplies, I can move even further west and start wrecking stuff deep in Republican territory. That should keep them occupied. We'll send you as much resources as we can, but are you aware that, at such distances, we may not always be able to offer you assistance? Of course, but I'm used to that, so no worries. It's the kind of war I've been waiting for quite a while, one where all sides have everything on the line and will stop at nothing to win. Finally, something fun to do. Remember that your job is to just buy us enough time to finish preparing Kairdon Caves. Once that's done, we'll call you back, and we fully expect you to return, understood? Both your skills and our soldiers will be necessary to keep peace down there. Do you still believe that? Do you really think we'll be able to actually survive down there like a civilized society? Yes, which is precisely why I will need you and our army down there to ensure that everyone behaves. Now that I look outside of the window and see Metzaka spiraling more and more into chaos, I understand what you meant. Old order won't survive down there, so we'll have to build a new one.